But we should move swiftly on to Vincent Ialenti, Assistant Research Professor at George Washington University, Elliott School of International Affairs. His recent book, which is again of note and inspiration for Anna and I, Deep Time Reckoning, focuses on Finland's nuclear waste repository safety case and its experts' engagement with future risk modelling. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Vincent.
Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Oh, perfect. All right. So yeah, thank you, Thomas, for this introduction, and to Anna for helping set this up. This has been a stimulating, fascinating event so far. So from 2012 to 2014, I spent 32 months conducting ethnographic fieldwork on how Finland's Olkiluoto nuclear waste repository safety case experts reckoned with deep time. And these experts developed forecasts of geological, hydrological, and ecological events that could potentially occur in Western Finland over the coming tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of years. They combined techniques of analogical reasoning, quantitative modeling, qualitative scenario making, mechanical stress testing, and geological and ecological fieldwork. And from this transdisciplinary bricolage emerged visions of distant future glaciations, climate changes, earthquakes, floods, human and animal population changes, and more. And their goal was to persuade Finland's nuclear regulatory authority, called STUK, to certify the construction of what, in the mid-2020s, is likely going to become the world's first deep geologic repository for spent nuclear fuel to go into operation. My goal as an anthropologist, however, was a little different. I was exploring how the safety case experts' reflexive engagements with the limits of knowledge could be retooled and translated into epistemic strategies for more vividly imagining Earth's potential socio-ecological futures. My aim was to rethink the value of future-gazing expertise during an Anthropocene moment of political, ecological, and epistemic uncertainty. And now, critical social scientists like me are usually quick to underscore how repository performance assessment models are reductive hyperconstructions or epistemic oversimplifications. And that's because they are. Predicting distant future worlds is ultimately an impossible task if you're striving for total perfection and one-to-one correlation between representation and the future that comes to fruition. But as an anthropologist, I see my job as trying to peek inside my informant's worldviews, apprehending their thinking's internal logics, no matter how difficult they may initially seem when encountering them in the field. And early on in my fieldwork, something became clear. Most of my informants pretty much agreed with me that absolute representations of the future are impossible. They described their models as simply the most credible forecasts they could devise using the best science and technology made available to them by their employers. Knowing this, I felt I had to resist the impulse to dismiss the safety case futurologies outright as mere fantasy documents, to use Lee Clark's terms, devised solely to manipulate gullible stakeholders into consent. They're not just rationality badges, in Andy Lakoff's terms, the sort of epistemic fictions created to legitimize a procedure and manipulate gullible stakeholders into consent. That's kind of the canard in the social sciences about what these models mean and do. But their endeavors were enabled by a wider Finnish populace known for these high levels of trust in domestic civil servants, police officers, educators, ministries, journalists, regulators, legal systems, engineers, and scientists. Finland was, after all, a country unburdened by the grisly history of domestic military-industrial settler colonialism, radiological experimentation on unwitting populations, and atmospheric nuclear weapons testing that reduced public trust in the US DOE and an earlier Atomic Energy Commission context. And the idiosyncrasies of Finnish expertise culture became even clearer to me when I returned to the United States in August 2014. As Bruno Latour observed, the disintegration of a shared, agreed-upon public sphere of facthood in the US had opened the door for large corporations, lobbyists, and fringe experts to reframe public understandings of science. In this milieu, it struck a different chord when critical social scientists moved to deconstruct or destabilize the ostensible hegemony of objectivity, truth, and facthood. These same analytical strategies were, after all, increasingly used and co-opted by right-wing populists to sow doubt about climate change models, coronavirus epidemiological models, vaccine science, and even basic claims to journalistic rigor. So I decided to try something a little different with my 121 interviews from Finland. I wanted to build something collaboratively alongside safety case knowledge, rather than simply trying to pull the rug out from under its claims to knowledge and its acknowledgement of uncertainty. So I decided to focus on something my informants and I could mostly agree on, not all of them, that most of our 21st century societal institutions and life rhythms are calibrated to rather short-term time spans in the geologic scheme of things. The result was the book that Thomas mentioned, Deep Time Reckoning, published by MIT Press in 2020. In it, I sort of developed these highly speculative and pragmatic epistemic strategies for nurturing public time literacy and envisioning more long-termist socio-ecological governance systems. Deep time thinking is portrayed almost as a Foucauldian technology of the self, a discipline of self-cultivation akin to training in jujitsu, music, meditation, art, fasting, or athletics. And most of this is tongue-in-cheek in my book, I should also add. So in this spirit today, I'd like to take a dive into the safety case experts' deep time reckoning practices, recasting some of their techniques as starting points for envisioning more time-literate social, political, and ecological relations. But first, what's a safety case? Well, the safety case details the Olkiluoto repository's technical design, and then it forecasts the facility's fate over the coming millennia. Safety case biosphere assessors, for instance, that I met in the field, made projections about Western Finland's lakes, rivers, mires, forests, sprouting up and disappearing and changing shape and size over the next 10 millennia. The experts considered far future soil erosion, floods, and fires. They envisioned a 3-kilometer thick glacial ice sheet during the next ice age, slated to occur 50 or 60,000 years from now. They envisioned potential seismic events, earthquakes, and rock shears that could occur as the ice sheet retreats after the next ice age. They modeled how the current Olkiluoto Island site will eventually become an inland site. And in their models, glacial rebound from the last ice age eventually causes Finland's shoreline to widen further out into the Baltic Sea, engulfing the island into Finland's mainland. They also explored more pessimistic scenarios. These included models of worst-case scenarios where 14 different kinds of radionuclides escape from the repository's engineered barriers. This is the construction license application that I was studying epigraphically. Travel through the groundwater flows underground, the rock fracture network, get released at various points on Earth's surface and disperse in above ground ecosystems. And they even model how they bioaccumulate at times in plants and animals along the way. The biosphere assessors then made conservative assumptions that 6,000 far future people, all eating local food, will live in Western Finland, and that some of them, a critical group, may face a greater likelihood of exposure due to unlucky food selections. Even in these remarkably unlikely circumstances, the safety case ultimately argued that, as all stakeholders knew it would, that all these future people will be likely safely below Stoops' stringent regulatory dose limits, even under these unlikely circumstances. The safety case was made to persuade. But grappling with far future Finlands did shape the safety case experts' epistemic sensibilities. They routinely took findings from the retrodictive sciences, earth sciences, and stretched them beyond their original intent into predictive sciences. This made them uniquely comfortable with uncertainty and epistemic excess. So they adopted this stepwise procedure of progressively developing updated versions of the safety case that, aspirationally at least, grow more robust over the years. They call these successive versions iterations. The first was released in 1985, another in 1992, another in 1999, another in 2012, and another was submitted to Stoop later this year. Already submitted to Stoop, actually. So each iteration was seen as epistemologically tentative, a work in progress. A new one was to be assembled every 10 or 15 years until the repository's planned decommissioning around the year 2120. And when navigating this uncertainty, the safety case experts embraced something akin to what Emmanuel Levinas once called infinition. That's a cognitive state in which radical complexity is sort of comfortably allowed to overflow the thoughts that are trying to think it. This involved in integrating self-critique and admissions of uncertainty into certain reports. These include methods like knowledge quality assessment or sensitivity analysis, paying attention to the effects that different parameters and inputs have on the larger outputs of the model. Garbage in, garbage out, as people would say, so you had to be sensitive to data inputs too. Their idea was that their models' claim to legitimacy would be bolstered, not undercut, by transparently admitting to, systematically detailing various reductive assumptions found in their knowledge base. They understood that Finland's futures must always be seen in the plural, so they didn't put forth one single overconfident official future, assumed to perfectly represent the future. They forecasted a multiplicitous series of projections about potential future events, each weighted with different likelihoods of occurring. Venturing multiple parallel visions of tomorrow can tell us something, but surely not everything about far future Finland's, I was told. Yet models alone are not enough. They also stress the need to venture multiple lines of reasoning, convening several different teams, with each with different disciplinary backgrounds, to create a safety case portfolio that, to use the terms of Adrian Curie, is methodologically omnivorous. If readers don't trust the models of far future ecosystems or hydrogeology, they can turn to the defense of the repository's engineered barrier system. They can turn to engineering reports on the mechanical strength tests done on copper nuclear waste canisters. If they don't trust those, they can turn to the qualitative scenarios detailing potential future Finlands in prose. And this is a rhetorical strategy I call in my book strategic redundancy. It integrated the logic of many different fields to reduce the likelihood that one potentially inaccurate assumption doesn't invalidate the wider range of projections. And so they integrated and distilled fragmentary sequences of hopes, calculations, fears, data sets, dreams, models, and anxieties about Finland's socio-ecological futures into mundane artifacts of technocratic paperwork. But their perspective was not one of naive realism or crude positivism. They didn't backslide into what Bronislaw Malinowski once called the cult of the pure fact. Theirs was a reflexive, self-critical, polytemporal epistemic sensibility. And this is a far cry from the paranoid, totalizing settler colonial realism depicted by literature scholar Jessica Hurley in her discussion of US nuclear waste scenario makers. Hurley's case study was Sandia National Labs' 1991 inadvertent intrusion scenario for the WIP transuranic defense waste repository in Carlsbad, New Mexico. Hurley critiques the US report's claims to descriptive totality. In Finland, I witnessed something a little different, and also in the US to a degree too, I should say. My informants embraced this multi-perspectival mode of transdisciplinary polytemporality and infinition. And this sensibility was a refreshing counterpoint to the myopic scientism that produced many of the intractable problems of the Anthropocene. So I think it can complement Hurley's recommendation that we instead turn to Leslie Marmon Silko's fiction novel, Almanac of the Dead, for future gazing guidance instead. So Silko posits a futureless tomorrow of absolute unknowability, a phantasmal apocalypticism that, Hurley says, is a better starting point for reckoning deep time than Sandia National Labs' Promethean excesses. To me, this is a false choice. Sandia's epistemic excesses are very real. However, Silko's book depicts a future of talking parrots calling for Marxist revolution and depicts ghosts that ride donkeys in the future. This may make sense in the context of an eco-criticism journal, but it's simply not an option for safety case experts given the grave task of designing a solution for nuclear waste. So in my book, I take a different track. I encourage readers to get more comfortable with epistemic excess by experimentally adopting the safety case expert sensibilities. It means approaching the safety case as a pragmatic but reductive toolkit for rubber banding the imagination back and forth across time. In this spirit, I'd like to close by retooling one safety case technique and redeploying it on a new terrain or plateau in Deleuze's sense in his great book, 1,000 Plateaus, just as I do in my book, Deep Time Reckoning. So what emerges here is a speculative mental exercise encouraging readers to reflect more comprehensively on long-term polytemporal Anthropocene timescapes. So here we go. One line of safety case reasoning involves the power of analogy. Safety case experts studied a present-day glacial ice sheet in Greenland as an analog for making rough approximations about a far future glacial ice sheet in Finland during the next ice age. Others studied a bronze cannon from the shipwrecked 17th century Swedish warship Kronen, which was submerged for almost 3 centuries in Baltic seawater. They studied it as an analog for how Finland's copper nuclear waste canisters may or may not corrode in the future. In both cases, the safety case experts use present-day objects as stand-in features for making reductive comparisons across time. The glacier and the cannon can thus be understood as what Gabriel Hecht, the historian, calls interscalar vehicles, objects or artifacts that can draw us to move conceptually through deep time and human time, through geological space and political space, little navigation tools. In my book, I challenge readers to replicate these trans-temporal mental thought experiments in their own lives. For instance, when living in Washington, DC, I learned how, in 1922, okay, I see it end soon, I only have a second, so it's good. Excavators clearing ground for building the nearby Mayflower Hotel found fossilized bald cypress trees 20 feet below the surface. These trees grew roughly 100,000 years ago, and today 4 bald cypress trees planted in the mid-1800s grow in Lafayette Square right near the White House. So redeploying them as interscalar vehicles, as I walked home from work, the trees became these analogical resources I could tap into to help me do thought experiments about thinking widely across time. They provided me with tree analogies and imageries that I can use to envision and reimagine the nation's capital in the US analogically as a prehistoric swamp. So this exercise stretched my momentary now into wider histories and futures and distanced me from shallow time thinking. It's a playful thought experiment, but it can make you adept at navigating time. So anyway, to conclude, I'll say that in my book, these and other safety case experts become tools for nurturing deep time thinking and confronting the radical uncertainty that comes with it during a moment of Anthropocene political and epistemic uncertainty. We just have to remember that analogs like those in the safety case have a little something to teach us, even if they never offer us anything close to certainty. There's many limits to what a bronze cannon submerged in the sea for centuries can really tell us about a copper canister buried in granite bedrock for millennia. But they do offer this kind of empirical concreteness and materiality that's at least a little more tangible than empty navel-gazing speculation. And that's the little tiny glimmer of hope for future gazing that I believe anthropological engagement with safety case expertise can offer. Thank you.